a gypsy.
The viewers, I think, will see that behind that ravaged face and that tired, cynical smile, a mind, a sober mind, was racing. And I think that he was coming to accept that much of his life had been a waste.
That if you'd concentrated on the stage, we might have had a magnificent Olivia-type actor.
Yes, well, I don't know if I want to be a magnificent Olivia-type actor.
I interviewed quite a few Welsh showbiz personalities in my long career. Burton was the only one where I came away thinking more of the person than when I went to meet them.
Richard, you've always said that you get a tremendous kick out of coming back to Wales. Is that still true?
Oh, yes, indeed, yes. Very evocative sometimes. It takes me several days to recover after I've left, because peculiarly my particular village, Pontardavan, though I have a sister village too, which is Taibach, but Taibach has been radically changed by all these new roads and everything. But Pontardavan, apart from knocking down a few houses and the erection of about 3 or 4 others, is stick for stick and stone for stone, blade of grass for blade of grass, virtually the same exactly as it was when I was a child. And I went to the school, for instance, this morning, and that seems to me to be exactly the same. Same old scuffed stones and kicked cobbles. And, you know, James Joyce once wrote in a belle lettre or something, I read it when I was quite young, about 14 or 15, that every man was searching for the place he belongs to. And I always had that particular line of James Joyce's in the back of my head. I thought, if I'll suddenly one day see a place which I recognize as almost immanently, not the other word, belonging to me. And I didn't find any place particular that struck me as this is the place where I belong to, until perhaps about 20 years later. And I disguised myself heavily to go to the village, because if you think I'm recognizable in England or the United States or India or somewhere, naturally I'm infinitely more recognizable here because they all know the family face apart from mine. But if I put a bowler hat on, my face becomes completely distorted. First of all, it turns absolutely round. I look like an absolute idiot. So I went up by bus to Pontardavan. And as we turned around the lip of the mountain, and suddenly there's Pontardavan, I thought, well, by God, James Joyce was right. There is one place you do belong to, and it is, in my case, the place where I came from, which is Pontardavan.
There's a tradition here in Wales that that you owe a debt, an immeasurable debt, to the man that taught you here, the man that taught you your craft, Philip Burton.
Yes, indeed I do. But I think that the 4 people really to whom I owe an enormous amount were, there was a school teacher in the elementary school who was called Meredith Jones, who's lamentably dead. And he first opened my mind to the extraordinary width, beauty, depth, color of the English language, though he was a Welsh-speaking Welshman like myself. And the second, of course, was Phil Burton, who gave me the background of a classical education. The third was Emlyn Williams, who gave me my first part on the stage and on screen. And the fourth was John Gielgud, who taught me to speak verse by osmosis, as 'twere, not directly, but I worked in plays with him and he directed me in plays. So those have been the most profound influences on my dramatic career, anyway.
There's another tradition, you see, a dramatic tradition, Richard, which is that that you've still not, in a sense, realized the full potential, the full dramatic potential which Phil Burton and perhaps one or two of the others who you've mentioned saw in the young Richard.
Yes, well, it's a rather nice reputation to have because, for instance, I just did a play in New York, Equus, and it was an enormous success. And one of the critics said that their #1 critic, very acid, very acerbic gentleman who writes for the New York Times, and he gave me a splendid notice, but among other things he said that Richard Burton is unquestionably the most brilliantly promising middle-aged actor now alive. And my friends thought that that perhaps was a little insulting, but I didn't at all. I thought it's very nice to be still promising at 51. By 51, most actors have already played every part they can play and have become desiccated and dried up. No, actually, I think that my whole life, of course, is not acting. It's not a vocation with me as it is with almost all my contemporaries. Like if you talk to Laurence Olivier, who's not a contemporary, of course, he's the other generation. But the younger ones like Peter O'Toole or Albert Finney, Paul Scofield, Marlon Brando, those people, they were actors as it were from the womb, whereas I became an actor by accident. And I've never really taken it as seriously as they have, though I've worked at it very hard. It is a very hard job, and probably the best job I could have found for my particular kind of temperament. But it would seem to me that all the vicissitudes and torments and tortures and all life's tiny, small tragedies, which are now deeply etched into my face, have been a preparation for the 50s. Because now, with my enormous experience as an actor, both on the stage and the screen, and I've played almost every major role in the theatrical canon that you can play at my age. I've played Hamlet, I've played Henry V, I've played Coriolanus, I've played Iago, I've played Othello, I've played Shaw, I've played Chekhov, I've played virtually everybody, and of course a lot of films too. That I'm now ready to tackle the final ones, King Lear. I am going to avoid Macbeth because I think that he's dominated by Lady Macbeth too much, and I don't like the idea of being dominated by a woman. So I shall withdraw from Macbeth, but I probably will play Lear. And as you know, with Lear, which is the most demanding part in the whole vast canon of theatrical great plays, that is probably the most demanding of all. And you've
Do you
got to
feel any affinity with Falstaff then, if you say you don't with Macbeth?
Yes, yes. Falstaff, I think, was written with my father in mind. You know, a marvelous man in the taproom, great drinker, and rather fancied the opposite sex. Might have been written for me, come to think of it. And anyway, I think he's probably the greatest comic invention, with the possible exception of Don Quixote, in literature, and I long to play him. I don't know how I'm going to look fat enough, but we'll figure that out somehow.
The question about promise, you see, in a way, another way of phrasing the question is it true, as some of your critics have said, that the screen has really been an irrelevance in your life, that if you'd concentrated on the stage, we might have had a magnificent Olivia-type actor?
Yes, well, I don't know if I want to be a magnificent Olivia-type actor. You know, he's... Larry, of course, is a stupendous actor, and so are half a dozen of his contemporaries, Sir John Gielgud, Sir Alec Guinness, Sir Ralph Richardson, and so on. But by damn, they've had to work very hard. And the demands on a stage actor, especially in repertory where you do 6 plays or 5 or 6 plays at the same time, are enormous. And also enormously difficult to make any money at it. I mean, any real money, especially with the world in its present state. So ideally, I'm afraid, for about 10 years, I went through a sort of, I can only describe it as some sort of male menopause, and I didn't really care what I did. I drank very heavily and did any film that came along. Always been very careful about plays, though. I don't do any rubbishy plays. And indeed, I've only had one failure in a stage play. I've had many in films, but then it's very difficult to know what's going to happen between the cup and the lip in films. But I suppose I made about 10 memorable films. And I've done a few reasonably good performances on the stage. But I did neglect the stage for about 10 years. For instance, my last appearance in New York, in Equus, it was 10 years since I'd been on the stage also in New York in Hamlet, which I played there for a long time. And I think, too, that the British critics and general theatrical journalists, if you don't play on the stage in England, it seems that you haven't played. I mean, Broadway doesn't matter, you see, unless you've played in the West End or at the Old Vic. So I suppose in order to show them that I actually have been on the stage in the last 15 years since I left England and went to live in Switzerland, I shall do the next play probably at the Old Vic. Not the National Theatre, because I don't think I can afford the time to stay that long at the National Theatre, so probably play at the Old Vic, possibly with Glenda Jackson and Peter Firth, that was obviously going to become a big international star, and then take it to New York if it's successful in Britain, and then do a couple of films and try to keep that going until finally I drop dead of either exhaustion or boredom.
You mentioned money, and real money was the phrase you used now. You've made a lot of it, Richard, but has it been a driving force in your life? Has it been a top priority?
No, it's never been of any particular... I was one of those people, I think, who was born without any problem about money. I'm not suggesting that I was born rich. I certainly wasn't. I was born during and grew up during the Depression, and certainly there wasn't too much money around, but I never seemed to lack for it. The odd threepence in the pocket. And immediately I became an actor, and I virtually had a little more than a walk-on part with John Gielgud in The Ladies Not for Burning in, whenever it was, 1949. I was one of those strange things which happens every decade or so. I was a star overnight, so I've never had to worry about money in that sense. But because of the enormous taxation, especially in Britain, you can earn. I remember once when I was a baby, about 23 or 24, I remember earning in 1 year, I can remember the figures exactly, as a matter of fact, £68,000, which in those days, of course, was considerably more than it is now, and I paid £61,000 in tax. I thought, now there's something wrong there, isn't there? And of course I wouldn't cheat on income tax. I'm too terrified to do that. So I thought, I've got to do something about this. But I still kept working in England and the United States and paying British taxes. And one day I discovered, having earned by this time a couple of million, I suppose, I had a Jaguar car. I had about £6,000 in the bank, and I had a two-roomed, rather nice two-roomed flat in Hampstead. And I thought, what happens if nobody wants me anymore? Or I lose whatever trick it is that attracts the public. I'm going to be in trouble, which is why I moved to Switzerland and then concentrated for quite a time on films until I became rich enough not to worry anymore.
And you don't worry anymore?
No. I suppose I could retire now and live with relative ease for the rest of my life. Also, I was made a fellow of St. Peter's College, Oxford. Now, that doesn't sound like much, but they do guarantee me bed and breakfast for the rest of my life. And it's never crossed my mind